My daughter-in-law threw my husband's toolbox in the trash the morning after his funeral. She didn't even wait until the family had left. I watched her from the kitchen window, still wearing the black dress I'd slept in because I hadn't had the strength to change. She was dragging a green garbage bag across the driveway, and when the bag split open near the curb, she cursed under her breath, looked around to see if anyone was watching, and then spotted the old red toolbox sitting by the garage door where my husband had left it the last morning of his life. She picked it up with 2 fingers, the way you'd pick up something you found on the side of the road, and dropped it into the recycling bin. That was the moment I understood exactly what kind of woman my son had married. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. I worked 31 years as a high school woodworking teacher in Barrie, Ontario, and for 38 of those years I was married to a woman named Connie. Everyone called her who was the most quietly brilliant person I have ever known. She grew up on a farm outside of Orangeville, the daughter of a man who never trusted banks, and a mother who could stretch a dollar until it begged for mercy. Connie carried both of those qualities into our life together. She was careful with money in ways I sometimes found puzzling and occasionally found frustrating, and I never fully understood why until the morning I fished that old red toolbox out of the recycling bin and sat down at the kitchen table to open it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's a habit I've developed since Connie passed. I find myself jumping to the ending because the middle is still too painful to walk through slowly. Let me try to do this properly. Connie was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the January of the year she turned 64. The doctors at Royal Victoria were honest with us in the way that good doctors are honest, not cruel, not falsely hopeful, just clear. They said we should think in terms of months rather than years. They were right. She lasted 14 months, which the oncologist said was longer than average, and I chose to believe that was because she was too stubborn to go on anyone else's schedule. During those 14 months, my son Daniel came home from Calgary twice. He called occasionally. His wife, I will call her Nicole, because that is her name, called never. I understood that people handle these things differently. I told myself that. I told Connie that too, and she would nod in the way she had, the small quiet nod that meant she was filing the information away somewhere and would not be discussing it further. What I did not know, during those 14 months, was that Nicole had been calling Connie directly, not to offer comfort, not to ask after her health, to ask about the house. I found this out later. I'll get to it. Connie passed on a Tuesday morning in March, in the bedroom we'd shared for 34 years, with the curtains open because she'd asked me to open them the night before. She said she wanted to see the light come in. I held her hand and I talked to her about the summer we spent driving through Cape Breton the year Daniel was 12, because that was the trip she always said was her favorite, and somewhere between telling her about the lobster shack in Cheticamp and the way the fog had come down over the Cabot Trail that one evening, she was gone. I sat with her for a long time before I called anyone. Daniel and Nicole arrived from Calgary 3 days later. I had arranged the funeral home, the notice in the paper, the calls to Connie's sisters in Guelph and Sudbury. I had done all of it because doing things was the only way I knew how to keep moving. Daniel thanked me for handling it. Nicole looked around the house with an expression I can only describe as appraising. The funeral was on a Friday. About 60 people came, which I thought was a good number for someone as quietly private as Connie. Her colleagues from the library where she'd volunteered for 12 years were there. Her book club. A few neighbors. My old department head from the high school, who drove up from Innisfil. People said kind things. Several of them told me that Connie had spoken about me often and always, with a kind of fond exasperation that made everyone who heard it feel certain we were genuinely happy. We were. I want to be clear about that. Whatever else this story contains, we were genuinely happy. After the reception at the house, after the last car had pulled away and Daniel had gone to bed, Nicole sat down across from me at the kitchen table with a glass of wine she'd poured without asking if I wanted any, and she said, "We should talk about the house." I looked at her. I had been married for 38 years to a woman who taught me that the first thing said is rarely the most important thing, so I waited. "It's a lot for one person," Nicole said. "A 4-bedroom house. All this property. The upkeep alone. I've managed the upkeep for 31 years, I said. She smiled the way people smile when they think they're being patient. "Gerald, we're just thinking about what's practical. Daniel and I have been talking, and we think it might make more sense for you to consider something smaller. A condo, maybe, closer to services. And if the house were sold, Connie's been in the ground for 3 days, I said. Nicole's expression didn't change. That was perhaps the thing I remember most clearly. Most people, when they've said something wrong, show it somewhere on their face. Nicole simply reached for her wine glass. Of course, she said. There's no rush. We're just thinking ahead. I excused myself and went to bed. The next morning was when I saw her throw the toolbox away. I want to tell you about that toolbox, because it matters. My father-in-law, Connie's father, a man named August who died in 2009, built it himself sometime in the 1960s from red oak scraps. It was a simple thing, a rectangular box with a hinged lid and a brass latch that stuck if you didn't know how to work it. August had used it his whole life and had given it to Connie when he moved into the nursing home, not to me, specifically to Connie, because she was the one in the family who he said had inherited his practicality. Connie kept it in the garage on a shelf and periodically moved things in and out of it. Receipts she thought were important, a spare key to the car, instruction manuals for appliances. I teased her about it sometimes. I called it her filing cabinet. She would say, without looking up from whatever she was doing, that everything in that box was there for a reason. After I watched Nicole drop it into the recycling bin, I waited until Nicole had gone back inside, and then I walked out in my slippers across the cold driveway and took it back. I brought it to the kitchen table and worked the brass latch you had to press down and slightly to the left and lifted the lid. The top layer was what I expected. An instruction manual for the dishwasher we'd bought in 2019, a warranty card for the furnace, a card from a plumber named Costas with a note in Connie's handwriting. Reliable, fair, doesn't overcharge. Some old receipts. Underneath all of that, in a plain white envelope, sealed with tape and labeled with my name in Connie's handwriting, was a letter. And underneath the envelope, paper clipped together, were documents I did not immediately understand. I made myself a cup of tea before I opened the envelope. I don't know why. Some instinct told me I should be sitting down with something warm in my hands. Her handwriting was still strong. She'd written it, I later figured out from the date on one of the documents, about 4 months before she died, when she'd still had the energy to sit at the desk in the spare room for long periods. Gerald, she wrote, if you're reading this, it means you found the box, which means you remembered what I always said about everything in it being there for a reason. Thank you for remembering. I need to tell you some things that I should have told you while I was sitting across from you at the kitchen table. I didn't, partly because I'm private in ways I know sometimes frustrated you, and partly because I didn't want the time we had left to be about money and lawyers and things that feel cold when you're trying to stay warm. I wanted our last months to just be ours. I hope you can forgive me for that. I put the letter down and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the bird feeder I'd put up for her 10 years ago that she still filled every week until she couldn't anymore, and then I picked the letter up and kept reading. What Connie told me in that letter was this. Her father, August, had not only given her the toolbox when he moved into the nursing home, he had also, without telling anyone including Connie until a letter arrived after his death in 2009, left her a parcel of land outside of Orangeville, 43 acres of mixed farmland and woodlot that had been in the family since the 1940s. The land had been sitting, leased to a neighboring farmer for a modest annual fee that Connie had been quietly collecting for 14 years. She had put that money, every dollar of it, into a separate account held solely in her name at a different bank than the one we used together, because, and here she was, very direct in the letter, she had wanted to have something that was hers independently. She wrote that this wasn't a secret born of distrust toward me. She wrote that it was something she'd watched her mother never have, and she'd promised herself she would not live the same way. Over 14 years, with the lease income and some careful management through an advisor she'd been seeing annually in Barrie, the account had grown to just over $420,000. The land itself, she wrote, had been assessed the previous year at approximately $680,000, given how the area around Orangeville had grown. I read that sentence twice. Then she wrote, I've had a will prepared that you don't know about. I know that sounds alarming. Please keep reading. The will, she explained, left everything, the account and the land, directly to me, not to Daniel, not jointly, to me. She had discussed this with the lawyer I backed, the lawyer, a woman in Barrie named Petra Sundqvist, and the documents in the box included a copy of the will, the land title showing Connie's name, the account statements, and Petra Sundqvist's card with her direct phone number. Then she wrote the part of the letter that I have read so many times since that the paper is beginning to soften at the fold. Gerald, I don't know if I'm right about Nicole. I hope I'm wrong. But I've had several phone calls from her over the past 2 years, always while you were out, always asking indirect questions about the house, and what we had, and what Daniel would be entitled to. She never once asked how I was feeling. She never once asked about you. I want you to be protected. I want you to have enough that you can make your own choices for the rest of your life without needing anyone's permission or anyone's charity. Use it well. Use it slowly. Give some of it away to people who need it, because that's the only part of having money that's actually any fun. Keep the toolbox. Your father-in-law built it to last. I love you completely, Gerald. 43 years of knowing you and I never once changed my mind about that. Connie. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Petra Sundqvist. She answered on the second ring, as though she'd been expecting to hear from me. She was professional and warm, and she told me that Connie had been a client for nearly 15 years, and that she'd had great affection and respect for her. She confirmed everything in the letter. She told me that the will had been filed properly, that it was unambiguous, and that she would be in touch with the estate proceedings in due course. She also told me, and she said Connie had specifically asked her to make sure I understood this clearly, that because the assets were solely in Connie's name and passed directly to me through the will, Daniel had no legal claim to any of it. None. I thanked her. I sat for another few minutes, and then I heard Daniel and Nicole come downstairs, and I closed the toolbox and put it in the corner by the back door where it had always lived when it was in the house, and I put the letter and the documents in the inside pocket of my winter coat. And I went to put the kettle on. Here is where I have to be honest about something. A better person might have said nothing. A wiser person might have called a lawyer first and handled everything quietly and simply let events unfold without confrontation. I am not always a better or wiser person. I am sometimes just a 67-year-old man who watched his wife's ashes get scattered in the backyard 3 days after her funeral, while her daughter-in-law stood at the kitchen window calculating square footage. At breakfast, Nicole brought up the house again. She was more direct this time. She had a number in mind. A real estate agent she'd spoken with in the past week, meaning she'd made this call while we were still in the middle of funeral arrangements, had suggested the property could list in the spring for somewhere between $750,000 and $800,000. After the mortgage was paid off, there was a small one remaining. Perhaps $40,000. There would be a significant amount to distribute. To distribute how? I asked. She looked at Daniel, and Daniel looked at the table. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. That was something, at least. Well, Nicole said, with Connie's share going to Daniel as her son, and your share being the house itself. Connie didn't leave Daniel anything, I said. There was a pause. She was his mother, Nicole said. She was, and she was very clear about her wishes. I refilled my tea. I kept my voice steady, because Connie would have kept her voice steady. I spoke with her lawyer this morning. The estate is in order. The look that crossed Nicole's face at the word lawyer was the most honest expression I had seen from her since she arrived. What lawyer? Daniel said. A woman named Petra Sundqvist, in Barrie. Your mother had been her client for about 15 years. Everything's been handled. What does that mean, everything's been handled? Nicole's voice had changed. The careful politeness was gone. It means your mother-in-law knew what she was doing, I said. What followed was not pleasant. Nicole said things I won't repeat in detail, but the substance was that Connie had acted improperly, that a mother who truly loved her son would not have made these decisions, that I had clearly exerted some kind of influence, and here I had to set down my teacup, because my hands were no longer fully steady, and that she intended to contest it. Petra Sundqvist had already told me this might happen. She had also told me that the will was solid, that it had been drawn up when Connie was in early-stage illness and fully competent, witnessed properly, and that a contest would be expensive and almost certainly unsuccessful. She had used the phrase throwing good money after bad, and I had found that quietly comforting. I told Nicole she was welcome to speak with her own lawyer. Daniel, throughout all of this, said almost nothing. I watched my son sit at my kitchen table and let his wife do all of it, and I felt something shift in my understanding of him. It wasn't anger. It was something sadder than anger. It was the recognition that I had not done everything right as a father either, That somewhere along the way my son had become a man who sat quietly, while the person beside him said cruel things to his grieving father, and that was not entirely Nicole's fault. They left the next morning. Nicole did not say goodbye to me. Daniel hugged me in the front hallway and said, very quietly, that he was sorry. I told him I knew he was. I told him to call me sometime when he could talk. I don't know if he will. The months that followed were both harder and easier than I expected. Harder because grief doesn't follow a schedule, and because a house that held 2 people for 34 years is very quiet when it holds one. Easier because Petra Sundqvist was competent and thorough and kind, and because the legal process, while slow, went exactly as she said it would. Nicole did consult a lawyer. The lawyer apparently told her what Petra had told me, because we heard nothing further from them officially. The land outside Orangeville, I decided not to sell. Not yet. The farmer who'd been leasing it was a decent man named Roy who'd been working that ground for 12 years, and I called him in May and told him the arrangement would continue as it had been. He thanked me with the particular relief of a man who'd been holding his breath, and I thought Connie would have liked that. The account I moved into a proper investment structure, again with Petra's guidance. I set aside a portion for ongoing expenses. I gave a portion to the Barrie Library branch where Connie had volunteered, in her name, to fund programming for seniors. The woman who ran the branch cried when I told her, which made me cry, and we stood in the library foyer for a moment both crying, and then she made us both tea, and we talked about Connie for an hour, and that was one of the better afternoons I've had this year. I kept the toolbox. It's on the kitchen counter now, not in the garage. Every morning when I come downstairs I see it, and every morning I think about the woman who kept it on a shelf for 30 years, because everything in it was there for a reason. There are things I've learned from all of this that I wish I'd known sooner. I offer them here not as judgments, but as things I think about. I've learned that love sometimes looks like paperwork. It looks like a woman sitting at a desk when she is ill and exhausted, and making sure that the person she loves most will be protected after she can no longer protect him herself. It isn't romantic in the way we usually think of romance, but it is one of the most loving things one person can do for another. I've learned that people who ask about money while you are still in your grief are not asking about money. They are showing you exactly what they value, and you should believe them the first time. I've learned that sons learn from their fathers how to be present when it is difficult. I did not always model that well. I am trying to be honest about that. If you have children, be the person you want them to become when someone they love is suffering. I've learned that holding onto something small and ordinary, a toolbox, a letter, a habit of keeping things that matter, can be an act of profound faith in the future. Connie kept that box because she believed there would be a day when someone would need what was inside it. She was right, and I've learned that grief is not something you recover from, exactly. You carry it with you, and it changes shape over time. Some mornings it's very heavy, and some mornings it's simply there, like the bird feeder in the backyard that I still fill every week, because those seeds aren't for the birds anymore. They're for me. I'm 67 years old. I have enough money to live well, and simply for the rest of my life, which is what Connie wanted. I have a house that holds 34 years of a marriage that was worth every single day of it. I have a son I hope will find his way back to himself. And I have a red oak toolbox on my kitchen counter, built by a careful man in the 1960s to last a very long time. Connie was right about that too. It was built to last.